In 2021 Masters Reykjavik, we saw 15 South American players represent the continent, some Brazilian and some from Latin Am. Fast forward to 2025, there's only one South American player repping the continent, and he isn't even on an America's team. And now the question is, how did we get here? Well, this is a trend that started after partnerships became a thing. If you've been following this channel, then you know that I usually give pros and cons of partnerships and lead a little bit more positive to the idea of one. But I honestly believe the current format is the main reason why not only South American, but Apac, OCE, and other countries are lacking representation. I'll explain what I mean by that and give some potential solutions. I first noticed this when Bala made mentions of it on Platchat as to how Riot Games may be hurting the South American region. When you compare the numbers over time, you might notice a worrying trend for the continent and its future. Like I mentioned earlier, in 2021, there were 15 players in Masters Reykjavik representing the continent from different countries. It was actually more South American players than NA players, believe it or not. In Masters Berlin, there were 16. In Champs of 2021, there was 20. Yeah. For 2021, there was 51 times where South American players rep their org and country. And we see a similar story in 2022. Masters Reykjavik, 15. Copenhagen, 15. And Champs of 2022, we had 20 for a grand total of 50. It's during the 2023 season when partnerships became a thing. Is when we start to see a noticeable decline of players from this region. If we include Lock-in, which invited every single organization at the time to a tournament, there will be 25 South American players. Not bad, right? Well, let's go to Tokyo, where we only see 5. And in Champs, there's only 10. For a grand total of 40. And if we remove Lock-in, it's just 15. You might be thinking, oh well, that's just extreme. You can't remove a whole tournament. Fine. Let's look at 2024 then. Masters Madrid, only 5. Masters Shanghai, just 3. And Champs of 2024, we only see 8 for a grand total of 16. And to make matters even worse, if we look at Masters Bangkok in 2025, there's only 1, and he isn't even on an America's org. It's less on Vitality. If he didn't make the jump to EMEA, this number realistically could be 0. To be fair, there are fewer spots per tournament now, and for good reason. Riot noticed that fan engagement was highest throughout a tournament when it was shorter. Long tournaments, you see a major dip in the middle. And we all hate dips when it comes to gaming. Red carpets are the bane of all our existence. And they could be due to packet loss and or lag. Whether it's high ping, stuttering frames, or connection drops, nothing's worse than losing a crucial round because your setup wasn't keeping up. And best believe Valorant isn't Marvel Rivals where FPS actually means more damage. So why not try to level the playing field with Lego Fast? It's great for people playing far from the servers or even in a different region. Lego Fast helps you get the best possible connection for your setup, lowers your ping, and boosts your FPS, so you can focus on winning. He even has a built-in crosshair tool. Overall, one could say that it's perfect for Valorant players, whether you're grinding rank or just messing around with a meme crosshair. Plus it works on both PC and consoles, as well as other games. If you're serious about smoother gameplay, give Lego Fast a try. Download it today and see the difference for yourself. I have a link of it down below. At the end of the day, we all know every millisecond counts. But let's get back to why Valorant has embraced shorter tournaments after partnerships.
A number of times we're always concerned about viewer fatigue, which is a big deal. Every tournament, every competition in esports, the viewership chart, it's like a smiley face. It starts high with a peak because of the novelty. People want to see teams playing for the first time and the new rosters. And then it dips at the middle of the tournament. And then as you start to get to resolution, elimination, playoffs or not, it ramps up again because of course people want to know who's going to win. And when you stretch any of those blocks of competition, you're actually stretching the valley, not the peaks.
And honestly, Masters Madrid was my favorite tournament last year. And only 8 teams showed up. We had 0 days where both matches were like stinkers. And what I mean by that is that they were both 2-0 blowouts. Each day you tuned in, you were guaranteed at least one match that was a banger if you watched both. We can't say the same for other tournaments. sometimes you did get back-to-back stinkers. And it is kind of funny how the first 2 days of Masters Bangkok, there was also back-to-back 2-0s on both days. However, there were some maps that were really fun to watch, and it was still a very exciting event to watch nonetheless. Maybe Masters Madrid was just that special of a tournament. At least for me, it was anyways. That is just one of the pros and cons partnerships constantly offer. On one hand, you get higher quality play at the cost of less teams playing and representing, but we still have champs as an opportunity to see a wider array of orgs play. And since partnerships are the reason why there's less spots per tournaments now, it's still a con that we have to address. But back to as to why South American players may be struggling, one of which is just visa issues. We saw with Loud in 2024 where they blazed the scene. They were destroying everybody and were able to make a top 4 finish in Masters Madrid. However, there were a couple of things that kind of ruined their season. One of which was their comp, which a lot of the top teams are starting to figure out. And 2 was the visa issues. They were stuck in Ireland, and Tui's went on record saying that he didn't touch a mouse for almost 3 whole weeks, which is crazy because they almost beat NRG on Breeze, one of their better maps. If Loud had enough time to practice, they could have cooked up a better comp and adapted to the meta. But unfortunately, without a lot of prac time, they fell behind and their season was practically ruined. And these visa issues mainly happen with Brazilians, but they wouldn't be a thing if the Americas wasn't located in LA. There's also homesickness that players have to deal with. It's something that even Apac players go through too. And we'll get into Pacific's issues too later. To be fair though, Riot isn't just sitting on their hands. They did spread out the gap time between each tournaments and events so that players don't feel burnout, as well as possibly help them with the whole visa issues if they do find themselves in that predicament. And maybe the fact that there's little to no South American representation, same with Southeast Asia, could just be a coincidence. You let me know down below if you think things will change for Masters Toronto and Champs in Paris. However, one thing that is very stark is the lack of new talent coming from LATAM. Yes, you had 2G win Ascension, but you also have to remember a lot of those South and Latin American teams played each other while they were at home, or at least closer to home, and they were able to develop their own skills and get better. So when Ascension finally came around and they were playing against other competition from Americas, they pretty much just shocked everybody. But let's look at Crew and Leviathan. They rotate the same players so often, and I think it's because of those visa issues as well as how far away the Americas stadium is from South America. And if you're not constantly bringing in new talent into the scene, then that could easily spell the death of a region when the current players start to retire and there aren't that many good players that have tier 1 experience to fill in the gap. And speaking of the Blue Sea Serpents, we might as well just start calling this team Leviathan instead of Leviathan because they have more North American than South American players currently. And honestly, I don't blame them. They've seen this problem a mile away and they decided, screw it, we're just going to take NA players now. And honestly, it's working for them. They were the best South American org last year, and they only had 3 South American players on the team. The same could be true this year with only 1 South American player on the team. And again, I don't think this is an issue of a lack of talent. Again, look at Ascension. Those tier 2 South American teams shocked everyone because they were able to develop their talents in an environment similar to the NA talents, where they were closer to home and in an environment that they were comfortable with without having to adapt to a new culture. There is a competitive advantage versus someone who has to go all the way from, let's say, Florida to California and adjust versus someone who has to come all the way from Brazil and or Chile to adjust to California. There's just a big difference there. Plus on top of all the visa issues that you have to worry about as well. And if we look at EMEA in China, they kind of don't run into this problem either. You see, for EMEA, they're based in Berlin, Germany. And last time I checked, there was only 1 German player playing in the league. Click on Gentlemates. Where the opposite is kind of true for China, where most of the players in that region are from China. But if you look at Pacific, they're based in Korea. And it might explain why we see so many Korean teams qualify. Yes, esports is baked into their culture and their economy, which is why you see so many good Korean players. But we can't pretend like there aren't other players in Southeast Asia. But for so long, PaperX was pretty much just holding it down for that section of Asia. And with PaperX struggling the way they are, there could be a legit future where at Masters and Champions events, it's just going to be a Korean sweep. where you rarely ever see Southeast Asian representation, especially if PaperX continues to struggle. And it's so bad that there's people on Reddit basically grasping at straws, where if you are a Southeast Asian who is hoping to root for a Southeast Asian team, you're just left with certain players, like Kiko, who's half Thai, Zekin, who's half Filipino, and Jagamo, who reps the Cambodian flag due to his heritage. But overall, what's happening in South America, I can easily see happen with Southeast Asia too. But when it comes to passion, without a doubt, Japan has the most of it. During Masters Tokyo, they didn't have a single team to root for that was Japanese, but they still came out in droves. They even rented out whole stadiums for their Tier 2 scene. But there is a drastic lack of Japanese representation at Masters and Champions events when you compare to how passionate their fans are. Then there's the whole lack of Australian/OCE players. Now you might just say, oh, there aren't enough OCE people who are good enough at the Tier 1 stage. And I just have to hard disagree with that. It's not that they're not good enough, it's just that they're so far away from Korea that it's almost impossible to really scout Australian players unless they go to Korea. However, they're not even going to Korea. They're skipping some countries and going to China. I noticed this in 2024 where there were more Australians playing in China than in Pacific. You know your format is messed up when that's a reality. And it's true till this day too in 2025. There are more Australians playing in China than there are in Pacific, the league that's supposed to be their home. So now the question is, how do we fix this? Well, let's start with Pacific since we're talking about them right now. Me personally, I would break up China and Apac and do some mismatching, as well as add a 5th region. Basically, I would just combine Korea and China and base it out in Hong Kong for a couple of reasons. One, there's a lot of times where the Apac crowd is non-existent. Whereas if you look at the Chinese crowd, they show out quite often. And honestly, I think this will be greatly beneficial for China because they'll have stronger opponents to go against. The whole notion of iron sharpens iron is so true. These Chinese teams will constantly go against Korean teams that are overall stronger as a region. And there's a lot of good Chinese players. It's just that I feel like having 12 Chinese teams, that talent pool is stretched out thin. Whereas having less Chinese teams means that talent pool is more concentrated within the remaining orgs and could possibly lead to better performances and results at Masters and Champions events. Of course, Riot might or might not do this because they could be losing out on money. And I really don't know when the partnership agreements with Chinese orgs end. It could be the same with other orgs or it could be a little bit later. And then you also have to think about the Korean market, which is also pretty big for esports. I am pointing out the pros and cons just as a heads up. But for the 5th region, I will just add other Southeast Asian teams, Japan and OCE. And I will actually just base this 5th region in Japan itself. They have shown us that they actually care about Valorant, that they can make high quality fan engagement in and out of person. It's the least that we as an esports can do for this country that supports Valorant so much. Plus, this could open the door for Australian organizations like Lachlan's Power to actually be in Valorant. I feel like that'd be a really cool thing to see. However, I do want to mention that as a con for this is that I've heard it's very hard to get a visa to get into Japan. At least it was during that time when Rona was big around the world. I don't know if it's easier now to get in Japan for a visa. It might be, especially if it's for esports reasons. And seeing how big Valorant is in Japan, I'm sure they could make an exception if you are playing for a Japanese league related to Valorant. And now for the Americas, I think they should take a look as to what league is doing this year, at least what I think they are. Again, I don't watch a lot of League of Legends, but from what I've seen from their wiki page, they have a stadium in North America and they have a stadium in South America. So what I'm guessing is happening is that during the regular season before playoff starts, they're having NA teams versus NA teams in California, and they have South American teams versus South America teams in Brazil. And then when playoffs happens, both teams meet up to see who actually moves on to their equivalent of a Masters or Champions. So I feel like Valorant could do something similar to that. But again, this is just me guessing as to what they do. Maybe I should be really looking more into League. If I'm wrong, let me know down below, which I'm sure you will. Regardless, I think that isn't such a bad idea. But now the question is, where would they play in the playoffs? Well, I think the org whose team went the furthest at a previous Masters or Champions tournament will have home court advantage. So let's say a Masters Bangkok G2 came in like third place while there was no South American teams at all. So the playoffs would be held in Americas. And let's say in Canada, Crew goes on a crazy run again and comes in second. So the playoffs for Split 2 would be in Brazil. It's just an idea. I know there's a lot of logistic problems, and it might not even really fully solve the visa issues either when it comes to the playoffs if a Brazilian team has to go to California again. But I feel like it will give them enough cushion time to make sure that their players' passports are renewed at a proper time versus what Loud had to go through last year. That really killed their momentum. Another possible problem is the fan engagement in Brazil if there was an America's playoffs there, hosted there. During lock-in, one of the criticisms was that the Brazilian fans weren't showing up to non-Brazilian games. On the flip side, some people were just saying that Riot was hosting certain matches during times where everyone was at work. I'm not too sure, but that was something that I did see mentioned a couple of times. I think this would be a great opportunity for Brazil to redeem themselves in that department. As for Ascension teams, that can also be tricky. At best, I would just say you get in where you fit in. So at least both continents have 6 teams. It would be weird if like an America's Ascension team has to go to Brazil, but you know, like I said, it's not perfect. It's just some pros and cons that I'm listing out for each idea. I also want to mention people like Sultan, who their area of the world kind of struggles to find a chance at the tier 1 level of Valorant. Again, I don't want to blame completely Riot because the sanctions against Russia because of the war is more of a governmental thing where, yeah, Riot could say, screw you guys, we don't care, but then they probably get sanctions on top of sanctions or interviews by Congress, kind of like how Facebook did when they didn't bend the knee with social policies. However, partnerships do make it really hard to organize third-party events at the tier 1 level because Riot Games has such a strong control over it. Whereas in Counter-Strike, someone like Sultan may have been a little bit easier for him to find a tier 2 and or tier 1 team if he was equally as skilled in Valorant as he was in CSGO, basically in the same percentile, because Valve is a little bit more relaxed when it comes to organizing third-party events and overseeing certain rules in their esports. Again, there's pros and cons to everything. But overall, these are just some of my potential fixes. I know they're not perfect. If you guys have better ideas, let me know down below. Or if you think what happened with South America in this kickoff was just unlucky. Do you think South American Valorant isn't dying? We shouldn't be pressing the panic button yet, despite the past 2 years showing us a different trend. Regardless, let me know down below. Be a KDA warrior, and I'll see you later.